that President Biden and NATO didn't invite Ukraine to NATO because he's afraid of Russia losing, afraid of Ukraine winning, or there are back-channel communications with Kremlin, which is a terrorist organization, to reach the Minsk III deal. Should I prepare my son to be a soldier and fight Russians when he will be 18 years and 7 years? Thank you, Jake.
So first of all, thank you for the work that you do every day to try to advance Ukraine's democracy, deepen it, to try to deal with the challenge of corruption which continues to exist. And I know that you have been a big champion for that. And what I would say to your son and to everyone in Ukraine is, the rest of the world is in awe of the bravery and courage of every Ukrainian citizen who's standing up in the face of Russia's brutal war, its brutal aggression. Not just those fighting on the front lines, because the front lines have extended to cities and towns across Ukraine, given the hell raining down from the skies in drones and missiles and other attacks by Russia. I would say also that the United States of America has stepped up to provide an enormous amount of capacity to help ensure that Ukraine's brave soldiers have the ammunition, the air defense, the infantry fighting vehicles, the mine-clearing equipment, and so much else to be able to effectively defend against Russia's onslaught and to take territory back as well. And that we will continue to do that for as long as it takes. And President Biden will stand with President Zelensky today and other partners to do exactly that, as I was describing before. President Biden was clear and straightforward in his public comments about his perspective on the question of Ukraine and NATO. And some of what you said in your remarks about motives, I think, was entirely unfounded and unjustified. The president said quite simply that he's not prepared to have Ukraine in NATO now because it would mean that the United States and NATO would be at war with Russia now. And he also pointed out that every country joining NATO needs to take on a set of reforms, democratic and other reforms, and that Ukraine has made progress on this path, but there's more progress to make. So I think the most important thing in this respect is for us to be able to have the kind of honesty that was inherent in your question, but also for us to make sure that in having that honesty, certain insinuations or implications inherent in your question, which are not founded, get checked at the door so that we can talk to one another in goodwill, in good faith. And there has been a lot of conspiracy theorizing that simply is not based on any reality whatsoever. And also, I would just say the American people have sought in watching and wanting to stand in solidarity with the brave and courageous people of Ukraine to step up and deliver. And I think the American people do deserve a degree of gratitude for, from us, from the United States, from our government, deserve gratitude for their willingness to step up, and from the rest of the world as well, as do every ally and partner that's supporting it. And all of us should, in the final analysis, say the thing that is most powerful, most consequential in all of this are the people of Ukraine, even the youngest people of Ukraine like your son, because they are the ones really carrying the burden of this. And we have to do what we can to support them, and we will do that. I will personally do that every single day, as we have done for the last 500 plus days of this invasion, and as you pointed out, going all the way back to Russia's invasion in 2014.
Jake, thank you very much for what you have said. Thank you very much for this American commitment to European security. If it weren't for the US, we don't know where Putin would stand in Ukraine, so thank you for this. But thank you for joining us here. You have a very dense calendar, and you were asked there for all the negotiations, etc., that you took time to come to the NATO Public Forum. We are very grateful to you. Thanks, and all the best to you, Jake.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, everyone. We obviously have a very tight schedule, so we would like to get started. Everyone could please sit down. Thank you very much. I want to welcome everyone to our panel and say thanks for having me here as the moderator. And now they're going to be glad they have the fastest talker in this entire building to moderate this panel, because we have had to pare back the schedule and we have only 20 minutes. But I will say that already all of my lovely panelists have welcomed questions in the coffee break. Everyone says they're absolutely willing and delighted to continue our conversation after we have to wrap up here, just to stay on schedule. So I'm Terry Schultz. I'm a journalist covering NATO, for those of you who haven't had to run into me before. Happy to be here. I'm joined here for this panel on harnessing emerging technologies for strategic advantage by Rika Frank, Dr. Ulrika Frank, with the European Council on Foreign Relations, Barbara McQuiston, who is the chair of the board of Diana, someone we all refer to by first name as if we know her well, and we actually don't, and Barbara's going to help us understand more about Diana. And Andrea Traversone, he is the managing partner for the NATO, now I got to get it, Defense Innovation Accelerator. It's quite new, which is why it's not on the tip of my tongue yet. And Andrea is also going to explain to us about these new mechanisms that NATO has. But we're going to start with Ulrika. And everyone here knows that Ulrika is the drone expert. the drone expert in our environment. And one of the things that we have definitely learned with Ukraine is just how technology has changed warfare, and not just fighting, but also trying to make peace. And one of the stories that we have shared that we both treasure a lot, and many of you will have seen this, is when a drone led a Russian soldier who was trying to defect on the battlefield to safety as he was under fire from his own forces, trying to get off the battlefield in Ukraine. And he was led by a drone in the sky by Ukrainian armed forces, telling him how to get out of being under fire and to save his own life. So these are some of the stories that Rika covers well, and she is going to talk more about just how we can see what we are going to see in terms of technology dominating the space in new ways to wage war and peace. And then we will move on to the people who are going to tell us how to make that happen. Thank you very much, Rika.
Well, thanks so much, Terry, for this great introduction. Yeah, I'll try to be brief, but give you a sense of what's happening in Ukraine with regard to emerging technologies. So I think the most important thing to note really is that we are seeing a lot of new emerging disruptive technologies being used in Ukraine by the Ukrainian armed forces and by the Russian armed forces as well. But at the same time, we also still have the old. So I keep referring to this war as World War I with 21st century technology, because we have this parallel of trenches and dragon teeth, but at the same time, we do see a lot of drones in the sky. And really, when I say a lot of drones, I mean a lot of drones. I'm sure you've all seen the RUSI estimate that the Ukrainian armed forces are losing 10,000 drones a month. So that is losing 10,000 drones a month, which gives you an idea of how many drones are in the sky. And this is really the first thing I think to note with regard to this war, is that drones are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and we haven't seen drones used in this scale yet. And also importantly, we've never seen that many civilian systems being used, and I'll get to this in a second. Another really important technology is kind of software-based AI-enabled technologies and apps. We have apps that track missiles, where individual people can send in information about missiles they see and that track how the missiles are flying. We have the role of space. All of this is incredibly important. I'm going to give you a few more examples, and the two main points I want to make over the next 2 minutes. I'll try to be short, but. So the first thing I really want to note about technology in this Russian aggression of Ukraine is the enormously important role that private companies and private civilian companies are playing here. So a few examples. We have Google that has put a lot of Ukrainian website under basically a digital umbrella, which meant that they couldn't be hurt by DDoS attacks anymore. We have Amazon that has allowed Ukraine to put a lot of their state functions into the cloud and then therefore save their data and continue the functioning of their states. We have Starlink and SpaceX with their satellites that ensure internet connectivity in Ukraine. We have the Chinese firm DJI that is providing a lot of drones, or rather not really providing, but drones are being used in Ukraine by this firm. So the three observations I have here is that we have a lot of private civilian companies that are playing an important role. These companies are primarily American. That's something for the Europeans to note. And on the civilian drone side, we have a massive number of Chinese drones. What are the lessons that NATO partners should be taking from this fact? First of all, I think we need close and closer links between private companies and the state in peacetime, so that if something happens, you can hit the ground running, so to speak, with regard to these relationships. And this is something where we can definitely learn from Ukraine, because the Ukrainian state has been incredibly good at communicating and working with private companies. The second lesson Europeans and NATO should be taking from this is that we need to rethink our vulnerabilities and dependencies and really think about whether there are areas where the state needs to come back and whether we really want to rely on private companies here, or whether we want to build up our capabilities ourselves. And space is one example I would note. And then also companies need to take note. Companies need to prepare for a future where military confrontations are happening and their technologies are being used, and they need procedures in place as to how to decide who to side with, because not every future war will be as black and white as the Russia's aggression of Ukraine has been, where it hasn't been difficult for Western companies to side. And they will need to think how to control the use of their products in future military confrontations. There was point 1 on civilian companies and point 2, even in 1 minute, on private individuals. Because this is something I find extremely important and I feel we haven't really picked up on enough. And that is the fact that technology has enabled and motivated the involvement of individual people from all over the world in this war. What I mean by this, we have private individuals using the internet, using AI-enabled facial recognition, using all kinds of technology to analyze images shared over social media and identify, for example, war criminals. You have amateur hackers that are supporting Ukraine. You have crowdfunding efforts where private individuals are giving money through PayPal, with Bitcoin, all of these things, and collect money with which drones are being bought in Ukraine. And we're talking thousands of drones that have been bought through this private funding. So I'll close with the lessons on this for NATO allies. I really feel that as NATO countries, we need to take note of this increasing involvement of individuals in warfare. This isn't the same as kind of, war bonds where in the past. We have individuals much more involved in warfare. And I think we need to look to Ukraine and learn from Ukraine on how to harness this involvement, because Ukraine has been incredibly good at kind of getting this public support, playing with the meme culture, working with NAFO, these kind of things. I'm not sure NATO or the EU or states are able to do this to the same extent. So looking at how Ukraine has been doing that would be useful. And I'll end here.
Thank you, Rike. And I think for Barbara and Andrea, you're going to want to bring Rike as your opening act every single place you speak, right? Because she makes all your cases, and then you say, yes, we have thought about these things, and this is what we're doing to address them.
And we have thought about dual-use technology and how it's being used. I think Ukraine is an example of it. I also think that there are a lot of other challenges, security challenges that we have in energy, in food security, and we have human capital in our countries that want to stand up with solutions to a lot of these challenges. So NATO, by standing up Diana, the defense innovative accelerator for the North Atlantic, I joke because we all call it Diana so much. I almost feel like my first name's Diana. But we launched these challenges in an unclassified side where we're looking for the solution space to come from what I would look at non-traditional technologists, ideas, universities, startup companies, entrepreneurs that want to engage not only in the technology side, but in the mission for their country and for the alliance. This is incredibly important because, to me, national and economic security go hand in hand, and being able to work with these entrepreneurs to help them accelerate their business in the dual-use side, as well as looking at how these technologies and solutions would work in the field for a lot of the things that we do across NATO, which includes not only military use, but also looking at humanitarian aid and disaster migrants and other sort of challenges that the equipment and what we need to have in the field meets both a dual-use technology market. This is going to be important to develop that pipeline. Diana just started. We have just opened the offices in the Imperial College at London. Professor Deep Chana is the managing director. And we've just, as of June 19th, launched the first 3 challenge problems. And we want to be able to have people across the alliance put their solutions forward. We want to put them in an accelerator so we can help accelerate the business idea, and then also go to another phase of test, experimentation, and evaluation, and then rapid adoption so that one or all of the alliance can look at how this technology can make a difference for them in their mission. That's going to be very critical, and it's going to be important for us to be able to work with these startup companies and fund them and be able to help them accelerate the time at which they can get to market. So we're lucky to have Diana to start that pipeline and the ecosystem so that entrepreneur can right away start thinking about the business, start thinking about how to do business with the government, across the alliance, and also accelerate that innovation demand signal within NATO to be able to work at a more rapid pace, to be able to pull in the human capital from our alliance and strengthen our industrial base. It's really what we're looking at doing. So that's NATO, but complementary to that is also the NATO Investment Fund.
Because this is all very expensive, isn't it, Rike? If you talk about that many drones and how many thousands and thousands and tens of thousands per item. NATO, of course, I mean, I don't want to give too much credit here for being innovative, but I mean, they're also thinking about how to fund this.
Indeed, indeed, this initiative, the Nation Innovation Fund, is a very innovative and courageous activity that was set up by NATO and the allies. The NATO Innovation Fund is a one of a kind. It is the first fund that has been stood up to secure the future of the 1 billion citizens of the allies and to enhance NATO technological edge. This is a fund that is coming to fill a gap that I witnessed over 25 years of investing in deep tech in Europe, which is the innovation gap, which has not been funded properly neither by the public or the private market. And NATO stepped in to fill that gap, to invest in those deep technologies and enhance disruptive technologies that Ulrike was talking about. And so far, these markets have been underdeveloped, and the development of this technology has been uneven across the allies. And we also face a threat of competitive investment from adversaries and potential acquisition of these deep technologies by adversaries. And it is because of that that NATO and its allies have set up this multi-sovereign €1 billion fund to invest in this innovation to secure the safety of the allied citizens and to foster the innovation and the adoption of these technologies by the allies.
This is really a public-private operation in many ways. In looking at what the Alliance has stood up for Diana between the accelerators and test centers, having over 100 of them available, to be able to support and work with the entrepreneurs that want to get in the field, that want to make a difference and grow their company, but then also give them the opportunity to have that financed all the way in looking at how we can progress the technology, the company, and being able to address the security problems that we have now and well into the future. And I would also say to be able to expand what we have as the definition of security technology, because NATO has dealt a lot with armaments, but what we're talking about is technology that has a broad base. It has a broad base in energy and climate. We had the climate people here earlier talking about the challenges that are here. There's a number of solutions that are out there. How do we tap into that, and how do we inspire our citizens so that they realize they have a path forward in working with these challenge areas.
Rika, what's the biggest gap that you see, since you're looking at the development side and you're looking at the provision side of these kinds of not just weapons but technologies? What is your biggest question for them on how they're going to deal with it, how they're going to match the speed of the private sector in developing these without necessarily institutional support?
I find it really difficult to identify the one gap because especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, we're not talking about kind of one technology or one capability, but rather development throughout all military and indeed civilian capabilities. So it's a bit hard for me to point out the one thing that we need. But what I would very much emphasize is really there has been a big change over the last few decades where I'd say ever since the Sputnik shock of the 1950s, we had the situation that new technology was being primarily developed and funded in state-backed and often military-backed laboratories and development agencies. And over the last decade or so, this really has changed. Now a lot of the cutting-edge stuff comes out of the private civilian sector. But this has direct military implications. And I was mentioning there are so many really, private companies working in Ukraine that have nothing to do with the military, really, but their services are helping Ukraine keep alive, help Ukraine defend themselves and all of that. And so I think the most important thing really for NATO and for our states is to kind of get away from this distinction between, this is the military, these are weapons, these are kind of armament, this is the armament industry that are building the things we fight with, and this is all the civilian rest, because that doesn't work anymore. And so I think what Barbara just said is exactly what needs to be done.
The market has considerably changed. It used to be government would fund research and development 70%, 30% was commercial. That has flipped. It is closer to 30%, which is government funded, and 70%, which is commercial funded. But when we're talking about the future of warfare, we're talking about all the things that we can do prior to getting to a weapon. And the type of technology, we're seeing what's happening with software. We're looking at how the data can combat disinformation with space systems. Well, that's working with commercial systems to give you capabilities right away so that you have that information, that knowledge, and you can do things with it. But it's going to be critical that we have a pace and an ability to work with the startup companies, to work with innovation, and to work at a commercial pace and finance in a commercial framework so that we can keep these companies engaged and working on the security issues that NATO sees across the alliance.
Can I just, go ahead.
I think that the NATO Innovation Fund and the sister activity in Diana are sending a strong signal to the innovators that this market opportunity is available to them. What we are providing as a fund to entrepreneurs is basically a threefold threat, which is basically access to a new market, a very significant market, patient capital, a technology due diligence and certification and validation that they find hard to find in the market from traditional financial investors. And so we think that this is a very strong call to action by the entrepreneurs, that there's a great opportunity here, those that have commercial product, to adapt them and target them to defense and security.
I mean, one thing that we're hearing is there's not really any option for either side, right? I mean, this is the obvious way forward. Why did it not happen sooner? Of course, I have to find a problem with it. Why didn't you do it before?
Well, it's one of those things where I think that NATO's really realizing that it needs innovation and innovation across the enterprise. So one of the good things between these two agencies organizations starting within NATO is that we're creating that demand signal within NATO to address the processes that they have so that they can really leverage and take advantage of the market.
What I've witnessed, because I've been in this market for 25 years, it has been very hard for individual governments or the private market to step into this opportunity. So I think NATO was really brave and courageous as a supranational organization to realize this and step into the gap and leading with this fund and with the Diana activity. I think very few other organizations could have done this.
But it also needs the money. This is not like, it's not, you know, completely beneficial, only beneficial to those companies. NATO needs it as well. The sad thing is we are out of time. And this is my fault because I have to go be on the air. But as I said, my panelists have agreed to continue the conversation. I wish I was here to continue the conversation in person right now, but always leave them wanting more, right? That's what we say. And thank you. This is so interesting. This really brings us to a new level of what can be done, and brings in also the young people that we're always looking for to become interested and educated about NATO. I think this is also a really important channel for them, for you to get the best and brightest minds, and for them to understand what this is about. So thank you very much, and I apologize to everyone that we had to cut this short, but Jake Sullivan was kind of worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome to the NATO Public Forum YouTube studio. I'm Jack Kelly from TLDR News, and I'm very happy to be joined by Italy's Deputy Prime Minister. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for asking me today.
Firstly, let's start with the big issue. Do you think that NATO is doing enough to help Ukraine at the moment? And what do you think is going to come from the conference in that regard?
It's important for us to protect Ukraine, because it's important to respect the international law. I think we need to work step by step. The first important step is to have Ukraine with us in NATO-Ukraine Council.
Yes.
It's a first step paving the way for a full membership in the future after the end of the war. This council is an engagement, an important engagement for Ukraine, because Ukraine will be part also on the political debate, not only talking on situation in Ukraine. But this, I think, is a good message to Ukraine, a positive message to Ukraine, paving the way for the future.
Absolutely. We've heard a lot about NATO's new 360 approach to security and the global nature of threats around the world. With that in mind, how much attention do you think NATO should be paying in the Asia-Pacific?
I think security is a package. Is important now to protect the West and Europe through a strong engagement in Ukraine. But at the same time, we need to look at the South, Mediterranean Sea, and Indo-Pacific region. But NATO is not only a defense organization, it's also a political community, a political organization. For this, we need to work hard for peace, for a stronger engagement in other regions. My idea is to work more with India. India is a democracy. It's a big democracy. For this, it's important in the Indo-Pacific region to work with India, of course. We are in favor of the status quo. Also on Taiwan, one China policy is our strategy. China is an interlocutor, but it's also a competitor. For us, we need to strengthen the cooperation with our friends Japan, New Zealand, Australia. But In the same time, it's important to work hard in Africa. Look at the sub-Saharan region. The terrorism and Wagner are working hard against our security. Africa is very important for everybody. For this, we need to invest and to have a good policy in favor of growth of this continent.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll be able to have good conversations with other people at the summit about all of those kind of issues when it comes to global politics and your place in them. Thank you so much for your time, Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you for asking me today.
Thank you.
And we are back from our coffee break. Please take your seats. Please, everybody, take your seats, and we will continue. We're changing the topic now, and we will have on stage a group of distinguished ministers of defense and foreign affairs that will discuss the implementation of NATO's strategic concept adopted last year at the Madrid summit.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Natasha Bertrand. I'm a national security reporter with CNN. And here we have the Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace. We have the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Sweden, Tobias Billström. And we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Romania, Luminița Odobescu. The Minister of Defense for the Netherlands, Kajsa Ollongren, will be joining us shortly. And with that, I think we can just begin here. So I want to start with you, Secretary Wallace. So NATO's strategic concept, which was adopted last year, it reiterates NATO's open door policy. And you said recently that whenever this conflict finishes, we should be prepared as quickly as possible to bring Ukraine into NATO. But the communique that was released yesterday, it said that Ukraine can only join NATO when, quote, conditions are met. So what are those conditions? Can you elaborate a bit?
Well, first of all, the condition that I think everyone agrees, and has been quite a long-running condition, is for any nation that wants to join, we don't want to import a conflict into an Article 5 issue straight into the NATO alliance. And I think that's been pretty clear. The Ukrainians have always understood that, and I think that's the reality. But you know, we shouldn't miss the point that more than the 31 members of NATO, soon to be 32, nearly 50 nations have been supporting Ukraine to be successful in this conflict. So I think that condition is an understandable position. I think what people sort of have missed about yesterday's communique, and indeed the broader issue, is that there is now a complete acceptance that Ukraine will join NATO. It's not an if anymore, but it is a when. And I understand, you know, President Zelensky's impatience on, I want a timetable. I think that's what he talked about. But ultimately, culturally, it is accepted that Ukraine will join NATO. When that happens is either condition-based, Also, before this invasion, Britain with Sweden, Canada, the United States were invested in Ukraine and building their capabilities. Now, I don't think we have to challenge Ukraine's capabilities anymore. They're, sadly, for the wrong reasons, well exercised, equipped and trained. But ultimately, I think it is an important position that we recognise that NATO, and the Secretary General was pretty clear on that, it's about a when, not an if.
So I understand, obviously, the argument that Ukraine cannot join NATO until the war with Russia ends. But isn't that kind of incentivizing Russia to never pull its troops out of Ukraine? Doesn't this create a very acute strategic dilemma for NATO?
Look, I don't think Russia are heading towards a position where they're going to be able to choose. They might be able to choose to hold on, to sort of barricade themselves into Crimea, but at the moment, and despite some of the media coverage, you know, Ukraine is advancing every day. It might not be advancing to timetable that people might have predicted, but it is capturing ground every day. It is costing the Russians to hold it. And what we've seen, as we saw specifically, for example, when Prigozhin made his dash from Moscow, there is precious little Russian reserve for now available. So I don't think Russia has necessarily got the luxury to sit behind some defensive. It tried that, and it's now there's a counteroffensive, and Ukraine is making slow but sure successes. So I don't think what's going on in the minds of the Kremlin is that type of rational discussion. I certainly don't think he has the luxury to do that.
So your belief is that they can't just wait it out?
No, I think they are in a position where the attrition rates for the Russian forces are difficult. And yes, Russia has scale on its side. It can generate or try to regenerate its industrial base. It can resupply. It can send more young men to their deaths in the way they do. But ultimately, I think we should be more optimistic. We should also reflect on our own weaknesses that not many people that I've met, well, everyone I met underestimated Ukraine from day one. And I think that continues in that same light, that Ukraine has a lot more punch in it. It hasn't committed its reserves, and those reserves are going to be vital for the next stage. So I think we should just give them that headspace. We'll continue to support you know, the announcements from many nations today and yesterday about further munitions and support, I think puts us in a pretty good, strong position. And you know, Russia is feeling it. Some of the deep strikes that we've seen in open source have been significant stocks of their ammunition and logistics.
So sticking with you for a second, so you said the G7, they're going to announce today a new framework for guaranteeing Ukraine's long-term security. This sounds a lot like the kind of security guarantees that Ukraine was hoping for. Can you give us a little preview of what's...
No, I'll let you announce it. I mean, all to say is that, yeah, there's lots of layers to security guarantees, and one of them is to build the capacity and internationalize the requirements that Ukraine would need. It will need safer skies, it will need safer borders, and making sure that there's an international contribution to that within Ukraine will be quite important.
So moving on to Minister Billström, so on Monday, we saw Erdogan suggest that he would not move Sweden's NATO accession forward unless Turkey was also admitted into the EU. Just a few hours later, there was a complete turnaround, and somehow there was this deal struck whereby Turkey would allow Sweden to move forward. So how was this very abrupt turnaround actually achieved in the 11th hour here?
Well, I think you partly have to ask a question to President Erdogan and perhaps not to me, but as far as I can see, we stand on a very firm basis of the fact that we, since the last summit of NATO in Madrid, have fulfilled all the commitments that we made within the trilateral memorandum signed by Sweden, Finland and Turkey. And within that memorandum, specifically, there was written aspects concerning the security of Turkey in relation to PKK activities, which sometimes have had their basis in Sweden. We have, throughout these 12 months that has passed since the summit in Madrid, worked tirelessly together with the security agencies of Turkey, police authorities in Sweden, prosecutor's office, intelligence services, to see to it that we fulfill our commitments and take the security situation and the security concerns of Turkey seriously. That was specifically brought up at the meeting between President Erdogan, Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, I was present myself, and the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. After that, at that meeting, we decided to produce a new statement where we will enter, Sweden will enter, into a strategic compact together with Turkey in order to see to it that we continue these aspects of cooperation, which is also, incidentally, something which Sweden is very keen about, because within this framework we also bring forward the question of organized crime, which is a problem for my country, and which sometimes means that people who are being harbored or at least being present in Turkey are directing activities of organized crime on our territory. Now, we are very keen to get rid of that, but we can't do it without cooperating with Turkish authorities. So I would say that this is continuing to be a joint venture. I would also say that I think that our Turkish counterparts found the result of this cooperation so far pleasing.
And was this deal tied to the provision of American F-16 fighter jets to Turkey? I mean, what do you say to critics who say that this was essentially a quid pro quo with regard to the provision of weapons to Turkey for them to lift their hold?
Well, I think that President Biden has spoken very openly about a deal being presented, which entailed both Turkey, Greece, and the United States. But regardless of that, this was always a bi or perhaps a trilateral thing between those countries. It's not something which concerns Sweden. We have never been part of such a deal. We have not been involved with it. It's only a question for those states. However, if it was beneficiary to bringing Turkey closer to a decision to start the ratification process of Sweden's NATO accession, we are of course pleased and proud. And I think that this is good in itself. But I think one is making a mistake if one looks only at those aspects and forget the fact that this was a two-tier process. Without us taking into consideration the security concerns of Turkey, I don't think that this process would have moved forward, honestly.
And I do want to introduce the Minister of Defense for the Netherlands, Kajsa Ollongren. Thank you for joining us. Briefly, though, I want to go back to Minister Odobescu, and I want to ask, going back to Ukraine, about F-16 fighter jet training for the Ukrainians, because Romania is going to set up a hub, a center for that training after a big coalition of countries agreed to set up this training for Ukrainian pilots on F-16s and other kinds of fighter jets. So can you just talk a little bit about when you actually expect the training for those pilots to begin? What stage of the process are we in right now?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, which is very timely. Before starting, maybe a word of from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, a word of congratulations for our host, for our ally and partner, Lithuania, for organizing this important summit. Yes, you know that Romania supported and will continue to support Ukraine. This is very important, and not only for the Euro-Atlantic aspiration. This is, I think, the main results of today's summit, besides the strengthening the defense and deterrence in the eastern flank. And I think there are a lot of concrete results, and I will come back to your question, because it's very important to discuss what happens between Madrid and Vilnius. And we had a very important concept in Madrid, the strategic concept. We should remember that it came at a moment of tectonic shift in the Euro-Atlantic security. But also for my country, this was really a big achievement. And because Romania, as other countries in our region, were fully integrated in the alliance, fully interoperable with alliance, but not only benefited from NATO alliance, being an important contributor. So this is essential. I want to start to underline. I want to underline this important aspect for my country, because this concept now we are discussing what means in practice. And in Vilnius, we expected, of course, the implementation of the strategic concept, but also we have new decision to adapt NATO to the current complex environment we are living in, and speaking about the complex security environment. And of course, one of the decisions in the margin is for Romania and our alliance was to set up this hub. And now we are coordinating with our alliance. It was signed a statement yesterday to start the whole process. So we are at the beginning of the process. Yeah.
And have you received permission from the U.S. at this point to actually begin the training on the F-16 fighter jets? Because obviously it is a U.S.
Yes, U.S. is our partner, so we are coordinated with our allies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us. So I just want to turn to you now, Minister Ollongren. So the Netherlands has also been a key part of this coalition for the F-16s. And I know you spoke a little bit about this yesterday in terms of the fact that the Netherlands is going to be sending some of its F-16s to Romania for training the pilots. But will you be sending F-16s to the Ukrainians once they are actually finished training on them?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and sorry that I was late. Let me say something about this coalition. 11 countries, all countries present here are part of that coalition, even UK and Sweden, who don't fly F-16s. So that shows how important this is to all of us, and also that we need everybody's expertise in this project. It's really a complex project, but we're making it happen. The trainings are going to start in Denmark in August, and then thanks to Romania, who is willing to host the hub, the training center, we will be able to continue in a sustainable way in Romania for Ukraine, but also for other countries who are transitioning to the fourth generation fighter jets, like Romania itself and others. And I think that is a very important part of our partnership with Ukraine, and also showing the strength of unity, and that we have to cooperate. And that would be my second point. As we're all strengthening our defense, we are increasing our budgets, we've agreed to the 2% pledge, it means we will all be investing. But we all know that we have to coordinate our efforts more. I think, and I really believe, we also have to integrate our cooperation further. The Netherlands, for instance, has a very strong integration with Germany when it comes to the army, with the UK when it comes to our Marines, the Navy with Belgium. We are so much stronger if we do that. And being 31, 32, and in the future 33 countries in NATO, we have to make sure that 1 + 1 is not 2, but that it is more than that. And that is something that I think also, looking from the European perspective, having a more balanced NATO, where we, of course, the US will always be our most important partner and the strongest country. But we also have to live up to that expectation that we also are strong in Europe. Because if you look at NATO, it was created because of the threat of the Soviet Union. And we are now waking up to Russian aggression and Russian threat in many years to come, I fear. So stepping that up and making sure that we are as integrated as possible. And perhaps later on we could also talk a little bit about industry that we need in this respect is something that I'm working on every day.
So has the Netherlands made a decision yet about whether it wants to send F-16s to Ukraine?
Well, on the F-16s, I mean, it's a sorry that I didn't answer your question, but on the F-16s, we've started the training trajectory. And if you train Ukrainian pilots and Ukrainian personnel and engineers on F-16 and on this specific capability, then of course the perspective has to be that at some point they will be able to use the capability. But it does require a separate decision because, as you said, it is an American system. So when Washington gave the green light for the training, that's when we could, the things that we were already preparing, we could really put it in place. But to deliver the actual capability itself needs a separate decision and a separate green light by Washington. And so that's the next step.
Is Washington dragging its feet on that, or have you submitted the request yet to Washington for the ability to transfer?
I wouldn't say that Washington is dragging its feet. I think we're all looking on how this is developing, and we are now taking this step. And that means that at some point in time, we will look at how to take the next step.
And how long do you anticipate, just to stick with this question because it's so important for the Ukrainians, how long do you anticipate the training will actually take on these systems? A matter of months, a year?
Of course, we don't really know. It is new. We think that in 6 to 8 months, the training could be done for the pilots. Of course, for the engineers and all the personnel you need, we don't really know. It depends a little bit on language skills. It depends on how experienced are these pilots. We know the Ukrainians as very quick learners, but I mean, we've seen it with Patriots, for instance, which is also quite complicated. But 6 to 8 months is really, really fast.
So I want to move on to the question of cluster munitions and what it says about the gap that we are now seeing in ammunition supplies to Ukraine. President Biden said last week that there is a stockpile issue here, that the U.S. is running low on certain kinds of ammunition, and that in order to fill that gap, the U.S. does need to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine. Now, 3 of the 4 countries sitting here have banned cluster munitions. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, and I'll start with you, Secretary Wallace, to the decision by the U.S. to send these munitions. Do you agree with it, or do you think it was a mistake?
Well, look, from a military point of view, the Ukrainians needed munitions to shift Russians out of those defensive lines. Cluster munitions, as originally designed, were designed for some of those purposes, as they were for shutting down runways. Back to the 1980s, they were the drive towards the treaty was driven actually by the likes of Russia using them against civilian targets, and the inappropriate use of them. Like any weapon system, actually, you prosecute that against civilians, you break Geneva Conventions, you break international law, you end up with nations around here saying, actually, you've just got to try and finish it. So at one level, I understand the military requirement that the Ukrainians were facing. The United States are not a signatory to that treaty, right? So it frees them up to do what they feel is right. And, so I'm not a lawyer, but in a legal position, if you were to, if you're not a signatory to that treaty, and if those munitions are used legitimately against a military target, I think that is it's a matter for the US lawyers, but ultimately I don't think that is not against the conventions of war. It's how you use weapon systems. But in our nations, we've signed the treaty. We feel that we can't champion the use of them, we can't propose them, we can't promote them, we can't support them, we can't assist them, and that is the bounds of them. But the more general question of, is there a stockpile issue? Well, ultimately, as I said earlier, the supplying of equipment to Ukraine has been huge, vast. I think they prepared 12 brigades for this offensive. 12 brigades is bigger than most people's armies, right? It's vast. I don't have 12 brigades, right? So 12 effectively armor brigades prepared for this counteroffensive, mainly out of gifted equipment and donations. And this is a long war of attrition. And one of the lessons from Ukraine is we were very much poised in NATO for an offensive and a defense, which is our main goal, around night one, day one, as we called it. In night one, day one, we were always focused in removing air defenses and removing air threats so we could prosecute wars at leisure. And no one had really asked themselves the question, well, what if day one, night one becomes week 2, week 3, week 4? How much of our exquisite capabilities have we actually got in stock? And I think that's been the broader question. This is a prolonged conflict. Huge amounts of munitions are being fired and used, and we're all struggling to find ways of keeping that going. Now, how you address that as an individual nation is a matter for that nation. Obviously, I heard the position of the United States. For us, we've just started buying production line places to manufacture 155 shells, of which some of those manufacturers will go to Ukraine. All of us have had to struggle stimulating our supply chains, some of which went to sleep. When we put the NLAWs, the Saab, Thales, British, Swedish anti-tank missile, some of the supply chain had been asleep for 5 years. We'd bought our 4,000 or 5,000 or whatever we had all those years ago. And, supply chains don't stay open for nothing. They go and do something else. And I think when we signed a new contract with Finland and Sweden to buy a good few thousand more or maybe this year or end of the year, the reason it took time, and I was criticised in Parliament, was we had to find a new supply chain. And so I think it's a general challenge, munition levels. Of course it will be in this war, and every nation will find a way of filling that gap. Now, the United States took that decision. I don't know the secret levels of American munitions. It's not my business. It's for them, and I would keep mine secret. And so they're just finding ways around the challenge.
So do you think it was necessary at this point in the war?
We're signatory to the treaty. We can't promote or support cluster munitions. What I can say is I understand the military logic of a range of munitions that would be required to get through those front lines. A range of munitions. The US clearly looked at it, made a decision, and they're not a signature to the treaty. So.
Minister Ollongren, as the other defense minister here, I would love to get your thoughts, because obviously Netherlands is also a signatory to this ban.
I very much agree with Ben. This is exactly, we are in the same position. We signed a treaty. We don't have cluster munition. We will not donate cluster munition. We will abide by the treaty. And my analysis would be exactly this. So being in this war of attrition, knowing that the enemy is using cluster munition and even worse, I would say, than that. This is a solution between two countries that did not sign the treaty, that we cannot vocally support in any way, but that is explicable from a military perspective.
It does raise one challenge, which is, we should also remember as an alliance, we can't just take for granted relying on nations who didn't sign a treaty or don't have a capability, right? Because what is clear is we don't have in our inventories at the moment the necessary munitions to shut down airfields and break through lines that we might have done in the old days. One of my challenges now to my industry and to the department is we see the Ukrainians struggle to shut down runways, right? The Storm Shadow is a deep strike weapon, but it is not designed to destroy runways, right? It's designed to destroy headquarters and bunkered things, etc., etc. So, what have I got in my weapon stock should we find ourselves in a conflict to shut down a runway? So I think it goes back to, if you can't use cluster munitions, because we've all quite rightly signed this treaty, you need to innovate and come up with something else. And I think that's just exposed that challenge. That's the challenge the Ukrainians have.
And of course, the one reason, I think the main reason for many countries to sign this treaty is because we know that cluster munition makes many civilian casualties. That is the big issue, and that is what we really want to avoid. We know that Russia is not bothered by these things. They're making civilian casualties on purpose every day.
We have about 5 minutes left before we go to the audience for questions, but I wanted to talk about the nuclear question. And the NATO strategic concept for last year says that strategic stability delivered through effective deterrence and defense, arms control and disarmament, and meaningful and reciprocal political dialogue remains essential to our security. So has the alliance communicated clearly to Russia clear consequences should it take that step of using a nuclear weapon? And obviously we are now seeing growing concerns that they are preparing to move their tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. So maybe, Minister Odobescu, you could speak to this a little bit about your concerns.
Maybe just one question. I think one answer to the previous question, because I think the focus is now how we can scale up practically to increase our defense industry to support Ukraine. And I will say what we are doing at the level of the EU, because this is a tremendous work to put together important financial resources through the European Peace Facility, to the European Fund, also to increase the production in Europe, which is not always easy. To support Ukraine, and we have a lot of new initiative, which is new at the EU level, in supporting the production, in supporting Ukraine. So this is also, I think, it's very important. With respect to your question, yes, I think it's visible already, and it is already reflected in the communiqué of this summit. The risks we are facing in the nuclear area. So, of course, we are all concerned about this, and we stay together. I think unity and coordination among us, also through our discussions, but also in the public speeches, because it's practically we have the war at our borders. few kilometers away. And all the eastern flank is directly affected, but not only the eastern flank, it's the whole Europe, and this is a serious issue we have to discuss, and what is important is that it was correctly, timely reflected in this Vilnius summit.
Minister Billström, your thoughts? I mean, how are the allies, soon to be ally, how are you grappling with the possibility of Belarus storing Russian tactical nuclear weapons on its soil? Like, how is NATO dealing with that possibility?
First of all, this is, of course, a serious question. It would have been serious to Sweden, regardless of whether we are in NATO or not. That needs to be stated clearly, I think. However, I think that NATO simply has to do what we are already doing, namely to stand up in favor of both the values, which we are all in favor of, and try to also make that clear to a public audience, which is not only the EU or the NATO or the West, but also the global South. This is an international question. The use of nuclear weapons is always a very serious matter, regardless of any time we are living in. And we can just, today, or tonight, we saw the launch of an interballistic missile, the test from North Korea. That is also something to weigh into this discussion. So I don't think that we should limit ourselves to just a discussion about moving things to Belarus. This question is much larger. And the NATO has to send a consistent message to Russia, to Belarus, to North Korea, to all states who are even thinking about using nuclear weapons, what the consequences would be for all of us. And I think that message is being broadcasted very clearly.
Secretary Wallace, there have been some reports that the US, UK, and other allies, they communicated very clearly to Russia that there would be kinetic consequences, that there would be military action in response to Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon or a strategic nuclear weapon, but more likely tactical, in Ukraine. Can you confirm that there have been those communications to the Russians?
No, I think what we made very clearly, publicly and privately, is there would be severe consequences. It's not to our advantage to be specific, but also I don't think it was us alone. It wasn't the P3 of NATO alone. It wasn't Britain, France, and the United States, who are the three nuclear powers in NATO. I think we saw, and also slightly publicly, both China and India being pretty direct towards the Kremlin about what it thought of the threats. And I think we saw as a consequence, actually, at that time, a de-escalation of that rhetoric, and indeed Russia's desire or potential desire to use, I hate calling it a tactical nuclear weapon because it is anything but a nuclear weapon, and we saw that obviously the new flank is the Belarusian flank, which I think is actually, it'll be interesting what the president of Belarus really thinks, because he should be under no illusion these are not Belarusian nuclear weapons, these are Russian nuclear weapons on his soil, and I would like to be a fly on the wall to understand exactly how much say he would really get. So I think it's much a question for him about his sovereign state as anything else. But of course it's a worry, but it's actually why NATO is a nuclear alliance, right? You know, I've always thought it, you know, since 1991 we all got out of practice, right? You know, Britain is a nuclear power. Of course we have regular anti-nuclear debates, but not many. There's pretty much an all-party consensus in favour, except the Scottish National Party. But ultimately, if you don't continue the conversation with your own population, they will wake up surprised that you, A, have nuclear weapons, and B, that there is a threat. And I think Putin's done another favour to us all. He's reminded many of us the value of a nuclear deterrent because of his rhetoric. You know, he is the single man responsible for Sweden's entry, I think, into NATO. I mean, you know, he has been the best recruiting sergeant for NATO, and he has. I hope he goes home at night and realises he is 100% to blame, and is no one else. So I think ultimately we have to remind the population of NATO we are a nuclear deterrent alliance. We believe in that as a defence and deterrence. It's why we should be not as worried as we could have been with the Belarusian threat. And ultimately, you know, we invest heavily in that capability. And allies who don't possess nuclear weapons, however, exercise in facilitating and supporting that happen, because we are an alliance ultimately of NATO. And you know, sometimes nation members forget that, and they start to think about signing treaties, and you're going, no, I don't really. You can't be in NATO and want to ban, or I mean, I think ultimately Putin has reminded us of the threats and how deterrent has a role.
Have you, just a quick follow-up, have you seen signs that that transfer of the nuclear weapons has begun to Belarus?
Well, I think we've seen open source reports about that. I think Putin's made his statement. He made it not so long ago. I think he said certain weapons had gone or were preparing to go or whatever.
He says a lot of things.
Yeah, the funny thing about Putin is, while he's got a reputation for lying, he actually doesn't always lie. He's actually, you know, he says, you know, one of the problems with this Ukraine was he was pretty clear in his essays what he thought he was going to do with Ukraine, and everyone ignored it. And he wrote that essay. Sometimes he doesn't lie on something.
So you have not seen signs, or you have seen signs?
I think we've seen in open source, obviously, signs of these things progressing.
Okay. Minister Ollongren, I do want to ask you, because you mentioned this earlier, the 2%. I want to finish on that, the 2% spending commitment. Now it seems that that 2% is a floor, is now the minimum that allies are committing to spend in terms of their own defense budget. Do you believe that the Netherlands will get there? Do you have hope that the alliance as a whole will get there at some point, or is that 2% floor now too ambitious?
I mean, it's our commitment now. So we have to get there. And I'm really happy that as Netherlands we have anticipated, and next year we will be on the 2%. But it is something that has to, you know, you don't want to discuss it every year. And the 2% is, you have to translate it into real budget for years and years and years to come. Because that is the way you build strong armed forces, to have the predictability of being able to rely on that budget. This year, for instance, when we had to do budget cuts in the Netherlands, the Ministry of Defense was accepted from these budget cuts. And that is very important, that there is no political debate about the necessity of doing these 2% and not go under it. And I think that to have learned this lesson, at some point at the end of the Cold War, I think it was normal that we decreased because the tension was off. But we have, you know, in 2014, I think we all stepped up, but not enough. And that's why we have so much work to do now. And so, you know, it's about people, it's about new capabilities, but it's also about all these enablers that you need now. So there is, even though we will reach the 2%, and our commitment is very firm to the 2% as a floor, we still have a lot of work to do.
When do you anticipate the Netherlands will reach that goal?
We will reach it next year.
Next year, okay.
And we will, and the year after, and we will also have elections. So, of course, that means that for the long run, that will be part of the political debate. But my plea will be that we have to, you know, it's not only for the next years. It is for 10 or 20 years to come that we need this certainty.
Okay, well, with that, I want to open it up to audience questions. If you could, when I call on you, make your way to the microphone, and we'll do it like that. Yes.
Hello, my name is Elena Murzak from the Republic of Moldova. Of course, my question will go to Minister Odobescu regarding the situation and relation with the Republic of Moldova. Fortunately, we have a dedicated point in the summit communique, point 81, on the cooperation with the Republic of Moldova. Unfortunately, we know why. And my question is, what does it mean? Our public is interested. Practical support for the enhanced defense capacity building. This is the first question. And as well, President Iohannis referred to the support for the Republic of Moldova regarding the resilience. And how do you think if our national armies will work on the interoperability and how this process will be improved? Thank you.
You know, one of the one of the consequences of the war is the effects on the vulnerable partners, and the Republic of Moldova, but not only Republic of Moldova. And for historical and traditional reasons, Republic of Moldova is a priority for Romania, and our support is done bilaterally at the EU level and also in NATO. I think the fact that we have advanced in the cooperation with NATO is a step forward. And this is very important, and we have decided just before coming to increase the Romanian contribution to the DCB package with €1 million, in addition with what we have done before. This is very important, is we help Moldova to increase its resilience. And Moldova, Republic of Moldova faces a lot of difficulties, and it's not only the threat coming from Russia, because the reality is that Republic of Moldova faces now a hybrid war. And we put in place at the EU level, but also at the NATO level, instruments to support the Republic of Moldova. We have an initiative with France and Germany to support financially Republic of Moldova with all our partners. We put in place a sanction regime at the level of the EU for those acting against the democratic stability of Republic of Moldova. And what we have done here, it's practically a strong partnership with Republic of Moldova to increase its capability to defend itself and to face the difficulties in this very complex environment, because we are living around the Black Sea in a very complex environment, and the war is there, but also the consequences of the war in all areas. And I'm not speaking only about the effects of the war in terms of economic. I'm speaking about energy security, because Republic of Moldova faced blackmail from Russia in terms of cutting the energy, and then inflation is high there. So they need all our support to increase their resilience. But when I'm speaking about resilience, it's really I'm speaking in a broader sense, and we ask all our partners, allies, to come together. And what we have done today with in the summit communique with important paragraph for Republic of Moldova, I think it's a step forward.
Okay. I'll go there to the back.
Hello, Paul Sarautsas. I'm a journalist from Latvia. I have a question for Minister Wallace. President Zelensky has warned that the Russians may be planning to blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Would you consider that as being equivalent to the use of a nuclear bomb?
I don't think you can crudely equivalent the two things. It would be obviously designed to generate a dirty bomb or a contagious. It would be, you know, another nail in the Russians' coffin of reputation around the world. That, you know, it's now got a strong reputation for war crimes. It's got a reputation for torture, rape, invading other countries. Not much left. It can go into the darkness, but that would be absolutely another final step towards its total isolation. And, you know, we see Russia try and counter by saying false flag all the time. It's trying to claim everyone's about to do this, and usually Britain's sometimes behind it, I notice, in Russian allegations. Of course, I think that just exposes how they are themselves, that, you know, the only false flag really comes out of Russia most of the time. And I think last time the international community, the IEA, did quite a lot of work in making sure there was some sort of reassurance around the international community about this. The power station itself, I think a number of the reactors are now shut down, so the risk is lower of the consequences than it might have been. But, you know, he should be very, very careful about playing with that capability. You know, this is nuclear power is often, it's not an individual country's responsibility, it's often an international communities, which is why the IEA is so important. And, you know, of course there would be consequences for doing something in that power station, but I'm not going to equate the two between that and detonation of a nuclear weapon.
Have you seen preparations being made for that Russia is planning to attack the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant?
I'm not going to come and give you a running commentary of what I've seen and not seen. All I know is obviously, you know, in whose hands it currently is, and you know, we should just worry that, you know, it's in an invading country's hands, who has reputation for war crimes and atrocities. So, you know, that's got to worry us, whoever that, you know, is, and it happens to be Russia's doing it at the moment.
Okay, we have time, I think, for one more question. Yes.
Thank you very much, Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine. You said about today we're waiting for the security guarantees, but the problem for Ukraine is that we already had it. It was called Budapest Memorandum, and the United Kingdom was one of the parties of these guarantees. And we now know what had happened. Nuclear Russia attacked our country. So now to fill this security vacuum that we have, it looks like we have just three ways. First of them, to become member of NATO with a nuclear powers in it. Unfortunately, after yesterday's decision, it looks uncertain, and we can't understand when it will happen. Number two, if one of the nuclear powers will deploy nuclear weaponry on our territory, Russia is deploying in Belarus. Why, for example, the United Kingdom or the United States can't deploy it in Ukraine on a bilateral basis? And the third opportunity is to restore our own nuclear arsenal. So what do you think about this? Thank you very much.
Well, look, first of all, look, there is a danger that we're undermining this communique, right? So I think you're wrong on your reading of the communique, right? I think it's my fourth or fifth NATO summit, right? I have watched the Ukraine conflict emerge at first hand. I believe that what the communique really says and what the Secretary General says, this is a matter of when. Right, we've crossed the other bridges that used to exist. There were nations who genuinely would say, well, if and should Ukraine really, does it really belong in NATO? I think we have crossed that bridge. The question is a debate about when, and Ukraine is absolutely right to press us on when there should be a timetable for Ukraine to join. So I don't read your interpretation the way you do. I read it, and you know, my Dutch colleague said 33. There you are. There's another example of the when, right? So I do believe there will be a time in the nearest future, once we have helped you through this conflict, that Ukraine will join NATO, right? Secondly, look, I'm not going to comment on a sovereign state's decisions or what it wants to do or needs to do to defend itself. You know, Britain is a nuclear weapons state. I'm not going to sit here and be hypocritical, but I also know the best thing I could do is stay on this stage, do this, this, and this, and President Putin will lap it up and say, you see, all along my fears are correct. You know, people are going to threaten Russia and et cetera, and that is not a game I'm going to play for President Putin, okay? So I also think that, look, you're right on the Budapest Memorandum, right? You're right in Minsk, okay? And, you know, I think one of the reasons the international community is so determined to help Ukraine be successful and Russia be defeated in this conflict is partly to right some of the wrongs, okay? I mean, I can't turn back time. I wish I had a time machine, okay? And I'm sure if Ukraine had a time machine, they probably wouldn't have turned up in Budapest, right? They would have said, tough, right? But remember, we have watched Putin go on a journey. Now, some of you in this room from Eastern Europe would have said he was always going to be like that, right? And some of you who know Russia better than I will ever know Russia will say that's what Russia is. But for many people in the West, they watch Putin go on a journey, and his journey has ended up where he is now. And I think there were, I mean, I even remember Putin muting whether he might want to join NATO back in the early 2000s, right? Luckily he didn't. But I think that journey led people to make decisions that I think we either regret or he has now himself reneged on. And he's the one who's broken the Budapest, effectively, agreement. But ultimately, you know, I don't think you should doubt that this NATO summit is all about helping Ukraine win in Ukraine against Russia, defeating Russia in Ukraine, and giving Ukraine the security it requires for its future to be prosperous and successful.
Okay, well, we are out of time, so thank you all so much for being here.
That's great. 15 minutes, yeah. If you could all, is my microphone on? Yes? Okay. If you could all take your seats, please. We've got a tight 15 minutes because the NATO-Ukraine Council is about to begin. And I know everyone in the audience has some interesting things that they would love to have answered by the two of you. So Andrei Yermak, Mr. Yermak, how wonderful to see you. Minister Landsbergis. I was talking to the minister, and because the council's about to start, and because of the bravery, courage that you've shown Ukraine, we actually think we're going to throw protocol to the wind and turn first to you. And I wonder if you could talk about, I was with you not so long ago, a few weeks ago, with President Zelensky in his office during a time of attacks. And President Zelensky said if he didn't get what he wanted at the NATO summit, that he wouldn't come because he would consider it a betrayal to the Ukrainian people. So he came. He hasn't got entirely what we wanted. We read that in his Twitter feed. Give us your feeling of why he decided to come. And then some people argue the communique was a prudent outcome. NATO doesn't want to go to war with Ukraine. Others call it a missed opportunity. I'd love to have your view.
Thank you very much. First of all, of course, the President Zelensky, President of Ukraine, come to Vilnius because it's important to be here and to be the partners, to be the alliance, and first of all, the unity of NATO and support which we really received during these more than 500 days of this war. It's a very, very strong signal to the aggressor that, first of all, that Alliance and the partners not just believe, they sure about our victory. The second, let's see, it's today it's not finished. And we are looking for some very serious results of the summit. And of course, our president, he's a very principled person. And of course, everything which he said before and our estimate and our feelings, you can listen, you can see. He is very honest. He is always very clear, declared, and the position of our country. But let's see, we really will have in several minutes starting this very important, I think the maybe most important for Ukraine meetings, the NATO Alliance, in which we will discuss first of all, of course, the continue of the military aids, which is very important for us to win this war. And of course, we will continue, and I hope it will be today, one very important moment for the security guarantees for Ukraine in the way to be a member of the NATO.
And just a quick follow-up then on that, in this balance between prudent outcome, missed opportunity, are you saying it all depends how things go from now? Because if you had listened to President Zelensky's or read President Zelensky's tweet from yesterday, where he's calling the language about Ukraine and NATO absurd, it seems to me that this is a movement in another direction now.
I hope that this summit not will be missed the opportunity, but once again, you can everything listen and see in the results of this day. We have very positive bilateral meeting already with some partners, and they look this, the positives of the results of this summit.
Thank you. And then just finally, how has it been received in Ukraine thus far?
Sorry?
This summit and the outcomes. How are Ukrainians receiving this and responding to it inside Ukraine?
Hmm? What's the mood in Ukraine about?
Mood in Ukraine.
You know, we have more than 100 days of war. And you know, all us in Ukraine, we are living in very specific reality, the reality of the war. And of course, Ukrainians looking for this summit and for the results in some very concrete things. And of course, you know, and these seconds, these minutes, our heroes continue to fighting. And this is, you know, for us, it's sometimes these days, it's the very special atmosphere, because here a peace, here the silence, here's not you listen, not listen, the sirens, and you personally, and my colleague and friends personally was and can see this reality in Ukraine. But, you know, our nations show all these 500 days that how we are brave, how it's possible to not be afraid, how it's possible to fight for independence, for freedoms. And of course, we hope that today's results of this summit will be more inspired and give for emotional and very important, not just emotional, some very practical support of our people, for our soldiers to go forward. And I'd like to say very important things, that we not stopping our fightings. No exist any force which can make us stop us till we liberated all our territories, we back all our people, and really win this war. And I'm absolutely sure that it will be our joint victory.
So, Mr. Yermak, I think that's a great transition to the Prime Minister. Having been with you recently in Kiev, I slept a lot better at night because of Patriot missiles. Here I can sleep well at night, not because of the Patriot missiles that are out there right now for your airport. Mr. Landsbergis, I followed your history a long time. I was here when you were in the Warsaw Pact and in the final days, and at the time of the Vilnius 10, ahead of your 2004 membership. Talk about this summit in that context, in the context of history, but also how you think history might remember this summit.
Well, that's an excellent question. We tend to look at Vilnius and Vilnius summits in a way that they sometimes do not offer a tactical change, but they offer a strategic opportunity. And it happened in 2014 when tactically at that day some of us felt that we might not have won the day, but at the end we won Ukraine, and Ukraine has won. I believe that something of that sort is happening these days, that somebody might have expected. Quite a lot of those here in this room and in this country expected more. That happened today, but I think that's in strategically, we won. We committed ourselves to Ukrainian membership in NATO. That's the biggest achievement, I would say, strategically. Now, where the problem lies, the way that I look at the history back. In the promise in Bucharest, even though it was a strong statement, Georgia and Ukraine will become members of NATO. It was a strong statement. The problem was not with the statement itself. It was with our lack of commitment afterwards. We did not come back. We came back to the statement 3 invasions later. That was a problem. So now I'm quite sure that we're committed, that we won't waste another year, another month, and another day staying on the question and doing everything in our power so that we stay true to the meaning that we put into the declaration. And that means, to sum up, that means that Vilnius summit was not the last stop. We have to see it as a bridge. And the next stop is Washington. So we still have a full year, lots to do, and I count on every single one of you to do your part so that Washington can actually be even more historic than Vilnius.
Thank you for that. And it being the 75th anniversary, I hope that's true. A follow-up question on that. Some say the actual communique language, because of how conditional it was made, is weaker than 2008 in Bucharest. But am I interpreting weaker language but stronger commitment toward the goal?
Yeah, I think that I was not there in the room in 2008, unfortunately, so I've just read about it and I was told about it. I think that the way it is being presented, that the consensus in 2008 was weaker. Mm-hmm. It was not there. Now it's much wider, definitely. You don't see an objection, from the people in the room who would say, Ukraine should not be part of NATO. We cannot commit ourselves to that idea. There's nobody saying that. Mm-hmm. So that is a step forward. again, coming from Eastern flank, we tend to see the situation a tiny bit different. A tiny bit different. And for us, actually, the history has changed since the last year. That's why our wording is stronger. That's why our stance is stronger. That's why our support to Ukraine, is more vocal. Because for us, the history runs a different course right now. And I tend to use the example of Berlin Wall. I think it's a very monumental time in European history, in world history, in 1989. So for us, last year, the wall has been rebuilt. Or it's being rebuilt. So basically, in that principle, we're back into, for us, it's Cold War. For Ukraine, it's hot war. But we're back in 1989 and going backwards. So this is where our mentality is. This is how we see the situation. And therefore, we are building on a different reality than it was in 2008.
So we all know that an alliance has to balance the long term and the short term. We also know that even, and Jake Sullivan was talking about that earlier today, unity doesn't mean you don't disagree. And press reports have it that at least 8 countries of the 31 were fighting very hard for different language, stronger language toward invitation for Ukraine. Can you, to the extent you can, where is the alliance unified? Where is it ununified? What is the crux of the differences in the room?
I would say in some cases, the horizon is, there is difference in horizon. We tend to see that the problems that we are trying to solve, the way that we're helping Ukraine, the way that Ukraine should be helped, we're talking decades of a new reality in Europe. Decades of Putin, who is still in power, who will be dangerous neighbor, who might attack again, who might assault other neighbors, even try Article 5, how that works. We are thinking in this term. It might not happen next year. In some cases, the horizon is way shorter, way shorter. We're talking years. In some cases, it's months. How do we survive this month? How do we survive till next year? How do we survive till next election?
And then, very briefly, then, your answer to the question of prudent outcome, missed opportunity.
I'm talking about the bridge.
Yeah, that's a good one. The one more question for you, then I want to go back to Mr. Yermak. The Baltic Aerospace Agreement. In all the reporting about everything else, very little has been placed on this. And then put that in the context of Swedish membership. Obviously, this was the big success of this week, and in many cases, in many respects, unanticipated. Put together this Baltic Aerospace Agreement, the Swedish membership. How does that change your region? How does it change security around the Baltics and Lithuania?
Well, I think that Swedish membership is monumental. Definitely, if we remain on the example of a bridge, so it's a pillar. Definitely, it's a very strong pillar, and. The way that we frame it currently, the promise of swift accession, Swedish swift accession has been made, and now we're very much looking forward to it, but it changes the situation in the Baltic Sea dramatically. It affects defense plans that are being voted for, that are adopted, but it changes them as well. Sweden is a very strong element in all of our defense, not just Lithuania, but also Poland. Also, I mean, I'm not even talking about Sweden itself, but also Finland, also Estonia. The whole Baltic Sea, becomes a different concept. That's a very strong thing. When it comes to the air defense, we're saying that, look, we have to talk about the content. Things don't happen overnight, so it's a very strong step forward. But now we will be looking for how it will be materialized.
Thank you for that, Mr. Yermak. So not a prudent outcome, not a missed opportunity, but a bridge. What would you like to see this week's events in Vilnius be a bridge to on behalf of Ukraine? What you talked about Washington? What do you hope will happen between now and Washington? And obviously, we have a spring offensive we're talking about at the same time. So there are two battles. One of them very real and on the front lines for Ukraine against the aggressor, Putin's troops. And the other is the bureaucratic contest in NATO, where we want to land by next summer in Washington?
First of all, I hope that during this period of time, we will win this war. This will be, first of all, the most important for us, and I'm sure it will be very important for all the world. The second, of course, as we're looking during this way and to the Washington summit, of course, we will receive the fixed security guarantees, because the security guarantees to Ukraine, it's the guarantees of the security of the whole Europe. And as I said, we hope that just today we will have very important stage of issue of this security. And of course, I'm agree with my colleagues that we are looking as a bridge, and we hope that, you know, during these 500 days, Ukraine a lot of times surprised everybody in the world. First of all, we are surprised then it started these invasions, and somebody gave to us 3 days, 1 week, 1 month. We are surprised, and we still not just defended, we liberated our lands. The second, you remember about then the President Zelensky, Speaker of the Parliament, the head of the government, sent the documents for the candidate states. Many people was very skeptical. We already received the status. We talking about coalitions of air jets. We're talking about coalition of tanks. We're talking about the coalitions of air defense. Already it's reality. And I think that we try everything from our side to will surprise and Washington. And of course, we are looking finally, as how said Mr. President Erdogan in the last meeting with President Zelensky in Istanbul, that Ukraine have everything to be a member of the NATO. And of course, we believe in it. And I'm glad that today I think nobody in the world just don't think that it's happened. Of course, we're looking for the perspective, for the future, but not hesitation that it's happened.
So, Mr. Yermak, final question.
And about, I'm sorry, about your second part of the I mean, the reforms and, you know, in the beginning, then Vladimir Zelensky go for the presidential campaign in 2019. One of his priority was the reforms of Ukraine. I can say it's in our blood. And of course, I can say that maybe it will be difficult to find another country in the world who just in the circumstances of this terrible war, not stopping any reforms. And we go forward. And I think many people and Ursula von der Leyen and the European leaders many times said how really impressed by the reforms which we continue doing just during this war.
So final question, we've run out of time, so final question for each of you, Mr. Yermak and then Minister Landsbergis. You have said, President Zelensky has said that strategic commitments can't replace NATO membership. Do you still believe that? Strategic support.
Yes, of course. Yeah, okay. Yes, of course. Of course, it's, you know, we are living in so rhythm of life that immediately back to Ukraine, we continue to do all the best from our side. That just if somebody have some hesitations in the colleagues, there is no exist, and to do and go forward and not stopping, because this is the goal and this is the decisions of Ukrainian society. Today, more than 90% of Ukrainians support it and believe that very soon Ukraine will be the members of the NATO.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Landsbergis, the bridge, Vilnius to Washington. How should that bridge be built?
I think that there are some very practical steps that could be taken and should be taken. First of all, there was a discussion about the need for additional reforms in Ukraine. At least this is what allies agreed upon. And Ukraine has shown tremendous, unbelievable capacity to reform under duress. This has happened on the path to EU. So I think that if concrete requirements are being presented to Ukraine, I'm absolutely 100% convinced that Ukraine will deliver on those, so that we could have, to show up for the allies. That, because the statement goes that when allies agree and the conditions are met. So I'm sure that Ukraine can deliver on part of conditions.
So an invitation in Washington would be potentially possible. Would be possible.
I'm convinced that it could be historic, not just because of the years.
I think that's a good spot to end on. So let me thank Mr. Yermak not just for being here, but for the courage of your country, and please send our best wishes to President Zelensky and all Ukrainians. And then Minister Landsbergis, what wonderful hosts you've been, and what an incredibly well executed and organized summit we've been taken care of so well here by every citizen of this country. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Please do have a seat. I'm Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund of the U.S. in Brussels, and it's a great pleasure to moderate this last of our sessions. And here we get to switch gears a little bit and talk about hybrid threats, what to do about them. But since we have with us, and we're really delighted to have with us Thanos Dokos, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece. It's also an opportunity to talk perhaps about some other things as well in the region, which would be good. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll have our conversation. We'll go to you in the audience, and we'll try to cover some ground before we finish. Thanos, let me start this way and ask you maybe to reflect a little bit from your position in the south of Europe and the southeast of Europe on the nature of the hybrid threats. Now, of course, this is nothing new. Hybrid threats are a very old phenomenon, but it's taken on a new character against the backdrop of a war in Europe, and the essence of it being this combination in different mixtures, perhaps, of conventional warfare, irregular warfare, political interference, malign finance, interference with infrastructure, almost anything you can name, frankly, can fit into this box of hybrid warfare. But anyway, from your background and also from your current position, maybe reflect a little bit on how you see it from Athens. Thanos, thanks so much for being with us.
No, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And Ian and I have known each other for a long time. And without implying that we are dinosaurs, I think we both remember the late Cold War days where all we had to worry about is counting missiles and main battle tanks in the context of the MBFR, which later became the CFE. Those were simpler days. Then we went through 20 years of post-Cold War era. Then we had to worry about asymmetric warfare and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And then after 9/11, jihadist terrorism. And then for the past, let's say, 10 years, it's a bit more of the same. We have to worry about systemic competition in the nuclear and conventional weapons. We have a major war in Europe. And on top of all of that, we have a number of new threats of a non-military nature, but you have with the revolution in computers, we have now social media, misinformation, disinformation. I understand that you can use a commercial software to produce some deep fake news, presenting each one of us as saying or doing almost all kinds of things. Plus economic warfare. It's a new world when it comes to security. It's a much more complex security environment. It's everything I've been doing for the past 30, 40 years, plus a new series of challenges. And since you asked me about my my daily tasks, one also has to worry about foreign intervention in elections, financing of political parties, cyber attacks, and also in the case of Greece and also much of the Balkans about meddling in church affairs by a certain country. So you can see how broad the range of issues has become today, and also how much more difficult it is for security professionals to deal with the challenges.
Absolutely. Thanos, thank you. I mean, Greece is an archipelago, among other things, and you have a lot of complicated infrastructure. You're not the only one worldwide that has this, but whether you're talking about transmission lines for energy or fiber optic cables or all sorts of other things, and these systems, this infrastructure is growing, and the potential for attack on it is growing. Talk a little bit about how you think about that problem, what Greece is doing, what NATO is doing.
Well, in the discussion yesterday in the Council, the Norwegian Prime Minister reminded us that he and the German Chancellor were the authors of this new suggestion for NATO to take over and look very closely at how we can increase our resilience, because truly one looks at the Atlantic region, the Mediterranean region, we are, all of us, too vulnerable, too exposed to interference when it comes to energy, interconnectors, communications. It's a new threat, and the destruction of Nord Stream was a reminder of how easy it is at the end of the day for someone to cause problems in our underwater infrastructure. So I think protecting it, but most importantly, building resilience should be a major priority for all of us.
And also the very difficult problem of actually ascribing blame, of understanding who the culprit is, and therefore thinking through how you deter it.
Well, one can try naming and shaming. It might work to an extent, but I'm not too optimistic. Then having evidence to bring that to a court of law will be very difficult, especially in the cyber sphere, but also in other hybrid threats. I suppose cyber forensics will be an area where we need to devote more resources. But it's going to be a major challenge to identify the culprit and then respond.
Absolutely. Thanos, let's, if I could, just to take advantage of your being here, we've obviously in this conversation over the last days had a lot of focus on the East, and this is totally understandable. But as we understand it, the new regional defense plans have been adopted at NATO include a southern dimension. There is a Mediterranean piece to this. And maybe you could just say a little bit about, A, how you see some of these risks in the Mediterranean, but also how NATO can respond to those.
Well, to an extent, I'm almost jealous of the eastern flank. Well, not really, but the threat is clear. And how you respond to that, how NATO is responding to that, is also pretty much straightforward. That's not the case in the south. You don't have a clear military threat, but you have a set of challenges. You have failed and fragile states, population dynamics and population movements, climate change, and so on and so forth. So how to respond to that, whether the organization is NATO or the EU, or even better, both of them, it's becoming difficult. You know, all the southern members have been asking NATO to remain present and active in the southern flank. Of course, you know, what exactly are we asking NATO to do is a more difficult question to answer. It does have an added value, and as in almost every other region, geographic region, and it needs to coordinate its efforts with the EU. But what exactly NATO needs to do in the south, it's a discussion, as you know, that has been taking place for too long. No concrete answers, but definitely a very complex security environment in the south without easy and straightforward answers on how to deal with the problems.
And in fact, I'd be interested if you agree. I mean, there is a nexus between South and East in this sense, because Russia is also present as an actor, not, you know, in your neighborhood as well, in the Levant, in North Africa, operating in a hybrid mode, I would say, which could slip into something more kinetic.
Russia has been an influence in the south, increasingly so in the last couple of years. Perhaps as a diversion or as a means to put pressure on the allies in that region. It's not the only malign influence. You have the likes of, you know, someone mentioned this morning that China is a challenge and we need to prevent it from becoming a threat. But China is very much present in the south, as are other countries. So yes, there are links and similarities between East and South. There are common sources of concern.
I'm conscious of our time, and I do want to make sure that we can bring in all of you. We also have one online question, which perhaps I could start with, and then I want to come back to you at the end with another question on a slightly different topic. But we have a question online. Is NATO considering to amend its articles, I suppose it references to Article 5, to match modern warfare methods, because now these are outdated?
Well,
so would a cyber attack be considered an Article 5 contingency?
Yeah, that's a very tough question. And this is, I think, a can of worms we don't really want to open, because revising Article 5 is one of the fundamental pillars of NATO. Revising it would be a very difficult question. So I don't see that coming anytime soon. Although I understand the logic. Now, it's not only conventional threats. Now we're faced with a much broader set of challenges. So how do we deal with that, and how we deter such threats? no easy questions, no easy answers to that difficult question.
Okay, let me go to the audience. If you have a question, please get my attention. And the gentleman right there in the back, do tell us who you are and where you're from, even though I know.
Thank you, Ian. I'm Martin Canstien from the German Marshall Fund in Paris. Question regarding China, and perhaps if you could elaborate on the discussion within NATO on how we can tackle the security issues related to China's growing economic influence, and perhaps more specifically in the case of Greece. What lessons have you learned from Chinese investment in Greece, and what kind of security challenges that you've faced over the past few years? Thank you.
Well, we have a major Chinese investment in the port of Piraeus. As I like to remind, especially our American friends, when we were forced to privatize the port of Piraeus, only the Chinese showed up with a serious offer, being good capitalists, so we didn't really have a choice. But I think we learned from that experience, so now have made clear that we do not welcome non-Western investment in critical infrastructure, especially 5G, but also energy and other critical sectors of our economy. And I must say, the Chinese have been, they accepted that without too much noise. So I'm not sure that Greece is your average country when it comes to relations with China. But you know, I think that clear explanations do facilitate a good relationship with a country like China.
Okay. I think we have time for one more before I have one of my own. So, looking out there. Yes, please, do just take the mic.
Hi, more French people. Erwan Lagadec from George Washington University and the Atlantic Council. In terms of the response to hybrid threats, it's usually said that societal resilience is the best way to ensure deterrence by denial. And the Nordic model is usually put forward, the defense in-depth model of the likes of Finland, Sweden, has been put forward. It's no accident that Finland hosts the Center of Excellence on Counter-Hybrid. We've discussed throughout these past 2 days the implications of enlargement to Finland and Sweden in some detail, but I don't think that this question has come up yet of whether part of the silver lining of the accession of Sweden and Finland is it's now getting way easier, including at EU-NATO level, now that there's this overlap in membership for the rest of the allies to pick a page from how the Nordics and to some extent the Baltics confront hybrid threats through whole society resilience. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you very much. So hardening society, resilience, others models, relevance to you?
I would say also early warning. It's easy to miss a hybrid attack, considering that this is an isolated event. So I think we need a raising awareness, especially among professionals, but also among the public, adapting a whole of government approach so that we understand that something bigger is happening, but also sharing best practices and experience is very important. We have allies that have had difficult experiences in the past, and we can learn from them. But also at the level of the alliance, NATO is learning, the EU is learning. We have the Helsinki Center for Hybrid Threats. I'm sure there are best practices and experiences that need to be shared between allies.
Okay. Thanos, thank you. I know we actually are out of time, but forgive me, just one last question, if I may. Allies have been concerned about tension in the Eastern Mediterranean